Hey everyone, this is Jeff Alberts,
Brian Miner,
Alberto Nunez,
Brad Loomis,
and Eric Helms.
and this is the 3D Muscle Journey podcast, where we bring you world-class coaching and evidence-based education for the natural bodybuilding community.
Hey 3DMJers, this is Andrea Valdez, and you are listening to the 3D Muscle Journey podcast. This is our 290th episode, which is such a huge deal, and we can't thank you enough for listening to us on this show for so many years. We really do appreciate it. And as we do every 10th episode, this is an audience-supplied Q&A session where we do our best to answer as many queries as possible throughout the duration of the show. Today, you'll be hearing coaches Brad Loomis, Brian Miner, and Alberto Nunez doing the answering this time around. We typically kind of rotate where the questions come from, and today we have a mix of YouTube and Instagram comments for this one. You can always find our squad and leave comments on all of our videos, podcasts, and posts by searching at Team 3DMJ on both of those platforms. That's TEAM 3DMJ on both YouTube and Instagram to keep in touch. Topics covered in today's episode will include whether or not bodybuilders can create imbalances when training mixed grip deadlifts, and if so, how they can address that. At what age bodybuilders can hit their peak overall size and how you might be able to alter that. If you should always diet with as small of a caloric deficit as possible, or if you should create a bigger deficit to accomplish fat loss goals faster. If you drop training days for a training block, do you still have to include planned deloads? How do you know if you need a refeed in your fat loss phase or if you're just hungry and the diet's doing its job? How many warm-up sets should you be doing with heavier compound movements? And what are signs that it's too little or too much? How important is it for fruit and vegetable intake to be hitting the recommended amounts for bodybuilders? And what should you do if those amounts give you bloating or GI distress? If someone with hypertrophy goals only has a home gym setup using dumbbells, what primary exercises would you recommend for each body part? And so much more. As always, if you have any feedback or comments on this particular episode, it's best to let us know over on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/team3dmj and leave it under podcast number 290. So let's go ahead and get into it. Here's Q&A session 29 with Brian Miner, Alberto Nunez, and Brad Loomis.
Team, welcome back to the 3D Muscle Journey podcast. We have a Q&A for you today, backed by popular demand. Brian, Alberto, thanks for joining me and answering the populous questions.
let's do it.
Bert, should we just dive in?
Yeah, let's give these people what they came for.
Let's start with question 1. Oh, very good. One of my favorites. It's a powerlifting question. I've been powerlifting for a while, and I feel best deadlifting with a mixed grip. But if I wanted to start focusing more on bodybuilding over the next few years, would that be a problem? Would I be unbalanced or look uneven if I continue to train my heavy pulls in a mixed grip? Should I switch to double overhand instead? Thanks. Asymmetries, you guys. What do we do about those? Can we do anything about those?
I think there's a couple components to this question because one, if they're switching to bodybuilding, I guess my initial thoughts are, you should probably just use straps if you're doing something beyond just like doubles and triples maybe. Like any RDL, I think we would all recommend using straps if the goal is hypertrophy. Just because we don't want grip to be the limiting factor for progressive overload. But I think from then there's like the asymmetry conversation. Let's say he wants to keep low rep lifts, deadlifts in his plan. How can he do that? Should he switch to a double overhand or hook grip? I think I know people that have always pulled with a mixed grip with no issues. That are primarily deadlift or primarily bodybuilders. Malcolm Cooper, good example. So I don't think there's really no reason to assume there's going to be an asymmetry that develops there. But if the goal's bodybuilding, I would probably just wear straps anyway. So that's sort of my position on it.
Yeah, that was kind of my thought was first of all, do you have an asymmetry? I'm assuming there must be a visible one that can be seen. That's why he's asking the question. But at the same time, how many times have we seen asymmetries until we diet down? And then we diet down, we're lean, and we don't have that asymmetry that we thought we did. Sometimes it's backwards. Sometimes you have an asymmetry on one side that looks a little bit more dominant than the other, and then you diet down and it's actually the opposite, That's kind of the weird and amazing thing about the human body. But yeah, I agree with you, Brian, 100%. If you're at all worried about it, then just start using straps. I mean, you don't have to. It's not like you're going to be deadlifting on the bodybuilding stage, Yeah, I totally agree with you there. Bert, you got anything to add?
I've seen some lifters complain about asymmetries, but it's like the minority. Like I think Ryan Doris, before switching over to overhand, like he was kind of shifted and had this weird tilt on the overhand side of his body, I believe. And that's usually what you see, but it's not super common either. Like there's a lot of good lifters that go mixed grip and they seem to be doing just fine. So for some people maybe, but I think my biggest concern is that underhand. If you want to bodybuild, it's just out there and exposed, basically, right? And we have seen every bicep tear I've seen has always been on the deadlift. Has always been on that underhand. So the good thing about switching from one to the other, it's actually it stops being weird super quickly. And right away it clicks as to, this is why most people who are more casual deadlifters rather than purist, they like doing it this way because it's pretty brainless. It's really nice in that regard. So that's my biggest concern is just you can give yourself an asymmetry if you're not careful, if you get strong enough on that lift, especially that underhand. So that's just something to take into consideration.
Okay, right on. We'll move on to number 2. It's an age-related question. At what age do you think most bodybuilders hit their max size? I'm in my late 40s, and I just don't see myself getting any bigger. In fact, I might be smaller than a couple years back, even though I feel stronger. Is that normal? Do you have any advice on how I could try to keep putting more mass on, or do I just have to accept where I'm at? If so, that's okay. Just wanted to hear your opinions if possible. I can't answer this question because I'm not in my late 40s, so I'm
yeah, but you're
I'm in my early 50s.
Seeing what's there.
I was gonna delegate the question to you, Brad. You've been there. So I think, it's impossible to say. It's going to depend a lot on not just your biological age, but your training age. I think if you've been training for 20 plus years, you've probably, and that's been a productive 20 years. You're probably doing well hanging on to muscle at this point. Isn't a bad thing. Like I said, that I think is shouldn't be viewed as a failure. So the fact you're stronger, I mean, that could be, more neurological adaptations, that could be better technique. So it's hard to say there. But I think, if I were in this position, I wanted to continue to put more mass on, I would be very conservative with the degree of surplus that I'm using, and just focus on, you should be seeing those numbers trend up, across the board over time, not week to week, but every few blocks you should be able to look back and see like an increase in your baseline performance levels. And if you're doing that, that's probably the best proxy we have. You're not going to be putting on an significant amount of muscle that you're going to be able to see it in the mirror over 8 weeks, so you have to lean on the performance side. But I think the biggest thing is don't create more work for yourself where you're having to diet longer later on. So I think gaining slow, and then anytime you do run a fat loss phase, you can kind of get back to gaining a little bit quicker if that's the route you want to go.
Berto, you're getting there too.
Yeah, and we'll let you finish with your anecdotes, Brad, because I think that's very valuable as someone who's been through it, and you're munching on the next decade. Um, Man, one thing you've seen across all sports is that the prime years are being pushed back later and later. Um, of course, it's a combination of things. Like most guys, for example, in the NBA that are in their early 30s, they'll probably tell you I had a little more pop, like probably when I was 25, 28, but they probably found different ways to kind of make up that ground through just being more savvy. We can't compare this to um, that sport though, because this is just very different. Um, it's a slow sport. Everything about it is slow at a certain point. Uh, so there is that. Like we're just figuring out ways through understanding more and more, like how to train for every sport, how to keep those peak years going a little bit longer. And I don't think bodybuilding is any different. That's something that you'll see quite commonly. In fact, is people get better from like mid to late 30s into their early 40s, and at some point early 40s, late 40s, there's maybe a little bit of a drop off, but I think that is more athlete dependent. A good example of this is Sam Watt. He's probably one of my favorite athletes across the board. He does both powerlifting and bodybuilding, and he could tell you any age he wants, and you'd be like, yeah, yes, sir. Like he is stacked, and he's I think 52, 53. He did his first meet in like 91, something like that. And he's consistently getting stronger as well. Although that wasn't the question necessarily here, but those things are kind of closely related, especially if you are a bodybuilder. So I guess the biggest factor I feel is how many things. Because to me, a reflection of how you age out of the sport is how many things you got right when your body was a lot more malleable. So you're just gonna have to get more things right. One, because of most likely your training age. By the time you get to 40, you probably have a few years under your belt, and also you're just not as resistant to injury. Like it kind of blows my mind when I see people in their early 20s. I'm like, you guys are so hard to hurt. Like you have no clue yet. Like you're doing skull crushers with like a 45-pound plate. No one does that after 30, but you're doing it right now. So yeah, I think a big part is also the orthopedic component. Like the healthier you can keep your joints, because that's usually where you see athletes decay. It's like wherever there is some pain, those are the areas that tend to go, and other areas that people tend not to beat up as much. Like calves, for example, they stick around really long. Like when have you heard of someone, I bum ankle, I can't do calf raises, or I've strained a calf or something? It's very rare. So yeah, you just have to be more mindful about what you can probably tolerate at this point, because there's probably some seasoning, some mileage in those joints, and you're gonna have to be really picky with your movement selection, like which ones have historically been good for you, which ones have hurt you the least. But I think where that ceiling is, like you don't know, but the good news is that the way natural bodybuilding works, it's like, okay, like maybe peak jackness was 43, but even as you start to decline, you're like, oh shoot, I'm more jacked than I was when I was 36, 30, 28. There's not a whole lot of sports that you can say that about. Personally, the biggest difference I've noticed is just, more easy to hurt. But also, especially when you're in those tweener body fat levels, when you have younger skin, muscles look more like big, full, and hydrated. It's just like that collagen lift, right? But then you strip it all off and you're like, oh, it's just there. It's just that very bubbly, elastic skin was kind of like holding things up a little bit more. So that's the first thing I noticed. It's just there's those like mid-teens, high-teen body fat levels, and I'm like, it doesn't look the way it used to. And then I lose a few pounds and I'm like, oh no, it's all there and then some. But one thing is for sure, I think being optimistic, and I think this is where I'll let Brad take over, being optimistic and not thinking about it any more than you have to. I think that is huge. Like you you need to have kind of a dreamer element in your mind where like there is no limit, and you gotta continue to enjoy this thing. And this is where I think Brad's done a really good job of. I'd say you're better than you were entering your 40s, Brad. I can say that quite easily. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that you aren't mindful in those ways that I listed, but also it's a high priority to you still, and you make sure you have a lot of fun doing what you do.
Yeah, yeah, and it's funny that listening to you talk, Berto, those are exactly the things that I've had to do over the last 3, 4 years. Is I have to be a little bit more picky about my training. I have to be a little bit more mindful of how much volume I can complete in any given time and still be able to progress. I've got to kind of track, my not just adhering to a progression plan. I need to track, am I progressing just as the outcome of my training? Just things I got to be a little bit pickier about. Yeah, you hit the nail right on the head there. But one thing that I've known this for a while, but I see it more now, and this is going to really resonate with our bodybuilders. They're the visual athletes in our sport. Muscle hypertrophy is not just size. Muscle hypertrophy is density. Sometimes it just changes shape. It doesn't necessarily just get to a bigger diameter. And I really noticed this when it seemed like my arms, my biceps, that's what everybody measures, as far as muscularity. Do you got those 18-inch pipes, When my biceps were at their biggest, they were barely 16 inches, barely, and I think that was just the right one. I think the left one was like 15 and 7/8 or something like that. But as I got into my mid to late 40s, they weren't getting any bigger. In fact, they were actually losing a little bit of size. But what I noticed is that they looked bigger because I started developing splits in places that didn't have splits before. And now they've continued to just kind of get smaller and smaller, but at the same time, they've just continued to look freakier and freakier and freakier, And the only way that I could really explain it into a visual sense is that Jeff and I like to use the term baby muscle. Those 20-year-olds that are super durable, they got big muscles. They got these big, bubbly, kind of balloon-shaped muscles, but there's not a lot of density to it. There's not a lot of muscle striation and a lot of that crazy kind of aged, marbled look. You know what I mean? And I can only make it akin to like when you look at a steak that's got the ribbons of fat that are kind of flowing through it and that's kind of inside of it, And then you look at that steak that's like super, super lean, that was probably one of the older animals that they killed. And there's like no ribbons of fat, it's just all meat, And Burrow, you're starting to get that look now that you're getting leaner and leaner and leaner and leaner. You're getting that muscle maturity look where it's just grainy. It's even more marbled than it was when you were in your 30s. Muscle hypertrophy is not necessarily size. It's that density. It's that crazy marbled look that it gets the older that you get. And yeah, it's not one of those things where you can kind of cleave it down to, is the tape stretching bigger, which is kind of one of the reasons why we use measurements and visuals. We use visuals and what is the performance side doing, that's what kind of keeps me going in bodybuilding. Because you look at what I accomplished last year, and Burrow, you kind of said the same thing last year. It was like 1 year ago, to this month. You're like, yeah, Brad, this is arguably the best package that you've ever, put on stage. Was I as big? No, I wasn't. My arms were smaller, my legs were smaller, but boy, you sure really couldn't tell it. Just because of that crazy dense look that I had to manage to accomplish. And yeah, that meant a lot to me to hear you say that. So. Okay, good. We've got a fat loss question, you guys. If you wanted to lose a pound of fat per week, do you just go right to a full 500 calorie drop on day 1 of the diet? Or do you slowly decrease calories in case you could start losing weight with less than 500 calories a day deficit?
I mean, I think if you're losing a pound of fat a week, if we're using roughly like the 3,500 calories per pound, then there will need to be about a 500 calorie deficit on average for that target weight loss. And that could come from the diet, that could come from cardio, that could come from both. I mean, I think, if you wanted to kind of keep your day-to-day activity the same, then yeah, there's nothing wrong with just pulling the 500 out of the gate. There's really no like physiological reason you have to like taper the deficit up. So it's yeah, I think that one's, in my opinion, pretty straightforward. I mean, you may find that you lose, you could absolutely still lose weight off of, less than a 500 calorie deficit on average, but it's going to be less than a pound a week in most cases. And this is like ignoring all the noise that's going to inevitably be in the data with
Yep.
losses in glycogen, gut content, inflammation, et cetera. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's assuming that you know exactly what your maintenance is, right?
True.
Because how much of what we think our maintenance is, it's such a moving target, you could easily just go right into a 500 calorie deficit and then you become a slug. How many times do we see athletes that they're sending us photos and their room is nice and tidy and everything is kept up, and then pretty soon it was like a month later and there's a pile of clothes on the floor that was not there before, and then pretty soon the pile's bigger, it's a moving target. And so you have to start somewhere is kind of the bottom line. And assuming that you really do know your maintenance at that period in your life, with all activity being accounted for and then remaining the same on top of that, it's a safe place to start, because I mean, not very many people that are 100 pounds are going to try to lose a pound a week. You know what I mean? Most of the time with our recommendations, we recommend about 1%, of your body weight loss per week. And so most people that are going to start a diet, they're probably over 150 pounds. So if you just go right to that 500 calorie a day deficit on average, or I'm a big picture thinker, I think in weekly terms, that way we can periodize training a little bit. So it's 3,500 calories a week, right? 500 times 7 days in a week. Just going right to 500, I mean, you're looking at less than 1% of your body weight, loss per week if you're 150 pounds. And like I said, you got to start somewhere. And something, another thing to take into consideration is what are your body fat levels at? If you're really lean, that's kind of an aggressive rate. But at the same time, if you have a fair amount of body fat on you, that's not very aggressive. In fact, I would consider that very, conservative. So, yeah, lots to think about, when it comes to that. But you got to start somewhere. That's kind of the most important thing. And to me, I mean, unless you're less than 150 pounds, a 500 calorie a day on average deficit is a nice, safe place to start.
No, I'd just say the math has to check out exactly what you said, Brian. Like, if you don't lose a pound of fat, that's roughly what the deficit is going to have to be. I see no reason for tapering unless the person, maybe like myself, is one of those people who has a hard time like getting going. So, and they usually do that not on purpose. But I guess one note is that sometimes the math, or at least what it seems to be taking place on the scale per the changes you made, doesn't match up. And you hinted as to all the reasons, Brian, like fluid volume, whatever, right? All those many things that make the scale drive us a little nuts. But I like to open up the deficit quite assertively, because two things: most people, like when they start a fat loss phase, they kind of go a little bit sloth mode. Like you don't realize it, but your body will kind of figure out ways to compensate for the deficit. So it's better to be a little bit safer. But then also, one thing people forget is that bigger calorie amounts that are being taken in have a bigger thermic effect, right? So as you cut those calories, you have to take into consideration that the cost of doing business on a higher protein bodybuilder type diet is about 10%, right? And then you add to that the fact that most people, once you start the diet, they find themselves to be a step closer, what might seem like a 700 calorie deficit is actually a 5. So just keep that in mind. That's why I like to open things up pretty assertively from the start, especially if I know how the athlete responds to calories being cut. And especially when we're working with larger athletes or athletes that are have those, like Eric used to be this way when he was in his like semi-dreamer bulk era, where he could be holding weight on like 4,000 calories, but he'd probably have to dip down like into the high 2,000s to see some sort of obvious fat loss. So,
yeah, and I'm going to interject a question piggybacking on what you said, Berto. That happens quite a bit, and I think you just kind of shed a little bit of light on why people can hold weight at 3,500 calories, 4,000 calories. But then as soon as they dip down into that 500 calorie deficit, or even like you said, that 700 calorie deficit, we quickly find out that, guess what? You're not losing weight like we predicted, Yeah, and you shed light on that. But yes, Brian, I'm going to kind of throw that to you as well, because you might have some observations there that I was not aware of. Why is that? When we see, well, this was all the number and the math checked out. You were holding weight at 4,000 calories, and now we've dropped down to 35 or 34 or 3,300 calories, and the weight's just not coming off like we expected it, because we all see it.
Yeah, Berto touched on the thermic effect aspect, which is a good addition there, because, yeah, if you remove 500, you're losing out maybe, you almost have to pull 550 if we're assuming like a 10% thermic effect. But then it also feeds back into our expenditure. If we're more fatigued, as a result of the deficit, or just the substrate in and of itself being, less glucose availability, then that can negatively impact training intensity to some extent. NEAT levels can come down. So I think, being aware of how you respond in situations like that. If every time you start a cut, you feel like you kind of immediately, it's like your body puts up its defense system and you kind of go sloth mode out of the gate, then probably not a bad idea being a little bit more assertive to kind of compensate for that, kind of overshoot the goal, knowing that there's going to be some adaptive effect in most cases. And it's probably not worth trying to quantify that to like a huge degree, but I think Berto, you threw out like the 750 calorie deficit, maybe coming out to about a 500 in reality. I think that's reasonable. And the nice thing about starting diets a little bit more assertively as well is, you get some initial payout. You see that fat loss. It's good for motivation. And the worst thing that can happen is, okay, let's say you lost 1.5%, or even the first week, if you lost 2%, depending on the person, how much muscle they have, like that's where you also have to kind of do some of the math and be like, okay, well, I know I wasn't in 1,000 calorie deficit, or, whatever would yield a 2% rate of loss, 1,500 calorie deficit a day. A lot of that's going to be glycogen. So you just want to sort of let the dust settle and then start evaluating things. And the worst thing that can happen is you get to add a little bit of food back in sooner. So it's not, there's low risk there. Like if I have no idea where somebody's maintenance calories are, a common approach is, okay, let's have them track for 2 weeks and see what happens to their weight. Like, I think in some cases that's just wasted motion. It's like, let's go with an educated starting point, then see how your weight responds. And then from there, we can do the same math and figure out if we need to adjust up or down.
Hey 3DMJers, this is Coach Alberto Nunez here to remind you that investing in expert guidance is one of the all-time tested hallmarks of serious athletes across all sports. And for competitive athletes striving for peak performance, working with an experienced coach isn't just a luxury, it's essential. At 3D Muscle Journey, we understand the dedication it takes to reach your physique and strength goals, and we provide the programming and support to get you there effectively and sustainably. But our craft isn't just for the stage or the platform. We create career-spanning relationships with our clients to guide you along your lifting journey in a stepwise manner. We don't do quick fixes or rush transformations because those will always only be temporary. We know the art and skill of becoming an advanced lifter takes years, and we want to work with athletes who are willing to put in the time. If you want to learn more about all our coaching plans, systems, and prices, go to our website at 3dmusclejourney.com. We offer weekly coaching for in-season competitors and bi-weekly coaching for off-season or recreational lifters. There are also 3 different time frame options for one-off video calls that each include a training program and nutrition plan every 8 to 16 weeks. Our mission is to create athletic careers for serious lifters, and our one-on-one coaching program is how we do that best. It's more than just workouts and meal plans. We deliver comprehensive support tailored to your individual needs. Don't let another training cycle pass without the expert guidance you deserve. Investing in your athletic future now, and sign yourself up for coaching today at 3dmusclejourney.com. Thank you so much for listening and enjoy the rest of the show.
If I switch from a 5 times a week split to a 3 times a week split because of my new school schedule, do I really have to deload? Like if I'm doing less sessions, do I really have to take a light week sometimes, or is the fewer sessions enough to have me recover just fine? It's just for 3 to 4 months till the end of the semester. So I think this person's just kind of cutting down their training from 5 times a week down to 3 times a week. Can they just go to 3 times a week, skip the deload, consider the 3 times a week a deload, and then get back to it?
That's the thing in question, like whether he has to deload before he goes to 3.
Yeah, no, I think he's saying. I think he's saying if he goes down to 3, will he need to deload?
Will he still have to schedule deloads?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah,
I think in general, moving forward, not just a pivot block, I guess.
Yeah,
or needs a pivot block. I think if you're bodybuilding, like I think a sign that you're doing more than you need is you have to deload too frequently. I've gotten to the point where with most of my athletes, honestly, the way we do it is just when you kind of need a deload per life, you have a vacation or a busy week, and we just kind of know that, okay, it's probably going to happen around here, but you can go about your way for a long time when we're talking about bodybuilding training if you're dosing it right. So I think the amount of deloads that someone going on 5 or this person going on 5 to 3, if we're doing it right, shouldn't have to change really at all.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think, a well-designed like hypertrophy program, it shouldn't be creating like this high degree of overreaching session to session. And I think in most cases when people are deloading, it's either, they travel, vacation, or it could be, the connective tissues start, like just orthopedic aches and pains, or just mentally they just need a break. So you want to manage it off whatever the bottleneck is. So if I say like you probably don't have to deload very often with a 3-day a week, but you get 3 weeks in and all of a sudden you feel like you got run over, then like you still have to remain reactionary. I think a lot of people look for these, like, this isn't a yes or no answer. I think it depends entirely on how much volume you're doing. Like if you're doing a 5-day a week split and you're currently finding, let's say you deload every like 8th week or something, and you switch to a 3-day a week split with the same amount of volume, you may find you probably will still have to deload in a similar frequency. If not, you may even find it, for some people, it's like doing a larger amount of volume per session can kind of pick at some, pre-existing joint issues. So I think that there's no way of really knowing, but I think an easy way to sort of compare is it's like look at how much volume you're currently doing, and yes, if you allocate it across less days, that's still a significant amount of work, for your system. So I think you just want to remain reactionary in this case. But most people, if they go from a 5-time to a 3-time, it's probably going to involve some reduction in volume, cutting some lower tier movements out. And in that case, you may very well find that you can push it longer. But I don't think you necessarily need to like proactively deload every, X amount of weeks.
Yeah, I really don't have too much to add to that, except for just kind of anecdotes when we have kind of switched from 5-day-a-week programs to 3-day-a-week programs or 6 to 4, right? There's a fair amount of unintended consequences that happen to that just because of the psyche of the bodybuilder. Okay, well, I didn't intend to, but going out at 3 days a week as opposed to 5 days a week, I've actually been making my training harder. I've been going closer to failure more often. I've been pushing myself harder than when I was, training my 5 days a week. I've got more days off, and so I'm finding that I'm feeling a little bit better. So then, therefore, I push myself a little bit harder. And depending on, like you said, Berto, how you dose it, if you get a fair amount of days off, with that 3-day-a-week program, you can actually kind of make your training a little bit more effective. You've kind of replaced quantity with quality. And so, yeah, like Brian said, be a little bit reactionary, but be mindful of how, the quality and the intensity of your sessions is. Because if you picked up a fair amount of intensity, while only really cutting down your volume or your days, I guess I should say would be a better way to put it, like, what is that, like 40%? You could have easily chewed into that by just making your training that much tougher. And you didn't even know it until, wow, how come I feel the same now as I did training 5 days a week?
It's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point.
All right. Moving on to a diet related question. How do you know when you need a refeed? I know a couple of you guys kind of decide on the fly, but if I'm always hungry during my diet, how do I know when it's time to eat more for a couple of days or not? And if you guys are good, I'll just kick off with this one because I am getting a diet break going this week. And not because being hungry is part of dieting. You're not really ever going to be full unless you just eat the gigantic bowl of salad, and even then you're going to be full for a very short period of time and then you're going to be hungry again. And hunger is something that you kind of have to deal with. You're not going to have those nice full tummies very often, like when you're fed. And so for me, the decision to diet break this week, my body just felt like it needed to be fed more. That's really the only way I could put it into words. So specifically, this particular year, I've gone in all in on recovery. Everything that I can do to maximize my recovery, I'm doing it. Sleep hygiene, quality volume over quantity volume, you name it, making sure that my fruits and vegetables are there. I'm staying hydrated, all of that stuff. But this particular week, my body just felt, and I told my wife this morning, my body just felt a little bit tired. Not really beat up, although I do have one little injury that has gotten a little bit, it's gotten a tiny bit worse, not debilitating at all. It's not keeping me from doing my training, but it's getting more present. And my body felt just kind of tired. And, that's kind of the way that I have modeled this particular refeed. It's just, I'm a little bit more run down than I usually am, with all the other variables still being in place. My hydration, my sleep scores are actually better, as of the last 2 days. Berto, you'll be really proud of me. My average has actually been like 84 for my sleep score, 83, 84. So pretty darn proud of that. But all those variables being the same, my body just felt tired. It just felt tired. It felt more tired than used to. The loads are still going up in the gym, but it's just kind of more so this general feeling of my body feels a little bit more tired than the previous, 4 or 5 weeks when I was kind of hitting it hard with the diet. So, yeah, that's kind of how I have come to the conclusion that I need a diet break. I need to have a little bit more food this week.
Well, yours is a diet break. He wanted about refeeds.
Yeah, good point. Good point. And I think
you're gonna be off for like 7, 9, however many days, right? Away from the deficit. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but I have proactively given myself more calories once a week. I have made sure to get that refeed in there just kind of on a proactive basis. Not huge, refeed. It's just usually I just eat a few more, couple hundred more calories. But yeah, you're right, Berto. This is more of an extended refeed that I'm going through right now. And like I said, it was just because my body feels just kind of tired.
I think, refeeds, the goal of including them is almost entirely dependent on where you're at in the fat loss process. I think, somebody who's trying to lose 40 pounds, to get to a healthy body fat level, a refeed isn't gonna, it's going to be more probably for flexibility reasons and sustainability reasons, and less for like, I mean, yes, there could be some recovery that's benefited from that, but I think that the managing recovery and like filling glycogen stores back out, like those are all things that are much more important once somebody's already pretty lean, especially when they're kind of like contest prep is a great example. And in those cases, like I like near the end of preps, if I can have a consistent refeed schedule and I can start to establish like when someone looks the best, coming off of that or heading into that. So it provides information for like peaking within the bodybuilding space. But, I think for some people, like in the first group I mentioned, if somebody's trying to lose a significant amount of weight and they're just kind of building momentum, they might not feel a refeed may work against them in that case. If it's a break from structure and maybe they're still kind of susceptible to that on-off mentality when it comes to structure, then that can sometimes just lead to binging or, lead to multiple days of overeating. And so I think it's first, kind of be self-aware in terms of where you're at. And yeah, if you, like there's times like you said, Brad, where you just know you need more calories just for the greater good. It's not just a quick fix, but it's like I will be better off. The end product will be better because of this. And that's a hard thing to really navigate unless you're pretty lean, I think. Unless it's just for like mental reasons. It's like, okay, I just need a break mentally, go on a date with my wife, not have to worry about anything. That is, I think, definitely worth, utilizing a refeed for a situation like that. But it's, yeah, I guess my point is that your frequency and their utility is going to change across a diet depending on how long the diet is.
I think one thing they mentioned that is worth noting is that they're always hungry, and there isn't a book that I know of that's just solely about that because it's so complicated. There's someone in this world who's 600 pounds right now and is hungry. Like they're starving, they're ravenous. So hunger's just so multifactorial. Some people struggle with it more than others, for sure. And I think whenever you are diving into a deficit, it's kind of like rehabbing a joint, right? Like, okay, you know if you go too far, like there's a right amount of dosage as you're trying to bring it back up to speed. That if you cross that line, it's like, oh shoot, now you kind of have to restart the process. You're like 3 weeks behind. And the same thing with like exposure to caloric restriction. I think it's something that people just dive into the deep side of the pool with like way too frequently. And we know this because like even those who make it, like they don't tend to keep it off. There's a lot of good data on that. So for in their case, someone like this just screams to me that they are newer at fat loss and they just haven't built up their tolerance level to a level that aligns with their goals a little bit more. So in their case, they might need, like you said, Brian, refeeds primarily because, hey, they can maybe give you 4 days at a deficit and then 3 days at maintenance. And going back to our original question, like the difference between like what is a reasonable deficit and maintenance usually tends to be a little bit bigger on paper than it is. So it's like average size male here, let's say, it's like that could be another 700 calories on those other days where you get to, you'll notice that difference on your plates and in regards to like energy and satiety. So in cases like this, it's definitely a lot more psychological. And then there's kind of that in-between phase where it's not a contest prep diet, but you've gone beyond the point where you can tolerate a little bit more dieting. And this is where you guys know me. I'm so pro refeeds. Like I think they're underutilized. And it's annoying to me how people spend all this time playing Tetris with their like training microcycle to get the best output. But then when it comes to a caloric deficit, they're just like splat 1,700 calories. Like that's as much thinking as I'm going to do. And there's ways to do that in a more sophisticated way where, especially if you're training pretty hard and your bouts are pretty demanding, where you can position yourself in a way where having some refeeds can make you perform a little bit better on those days, especially in the areas that you are most least prone to growing, which often tend to be the ones that you're the most prone to losing when you do diet. And then, of course, there's like that deep side of the pool contest prep where you're going to go somewhere where certain health metrics will kind of take an L along the way, and your goal is to kind of minimize that. And with these athletes, like I feel most people start pressing that trigger a little bit too late with the refeeds. Okay, it's not for adherence for these people. They're willing to almost do whatever it takes to get there. At this point, they can tolerate quite a bit. They train pretty hard, but there's just certain things that are out of your control, and you're never going to leave like without getting punched in the face, like if you're prepping or trying to get really lean. But there's something to taking a slightly more defensive approach, because the thing about the health you lose at a certain point, first of all, it sneaks up on you. You don't realize it until it's too late. Like your partner might have to tell you that, hey, there's some mood disturbances taking place here. You're a step slower. All these things happen before we catch them. So for this demographic, I'd actually rather start with them before we actually need them, because it's very difficult to regenerate health during, any point in the contest prep, really. Like for the most part, once it's sailed off, it's sailed off. And that's been my goal with especially my prep athletes over the years. Like I want them to be out there like not like Rocky at the end of the fight. It's like he won, but like, dude, that don't even look like the same person. Like I want them to look like Floyd Mayweather, right? Like it literally looks like he got off a treadmill, and it's going to be a little bit different on everyone, but I think there's probably 3 different tiers. I think for the first group, it's just because maybe it allows you to expose yourself to what you're ready for, And for some folks, that just might mean like, hey, maybe just Monday, Tuesday, we do at a deficit because you struggle with this. It's a very patient road, but at the end, it's going to create less do-overs, right? And we can expand on your ability to cope and tolerate these deficits. And then there's a middle of the road folk that, hey, the tolerance of the deficit's not the issue, but you're probably decently experienced now, and you want to train hard during your fat loss phase. Let's infuse it with this. And then for the contest prepper, it's going to be the infusion of the micro split, make that thing really come to life. The training micro split by having a nutrition micro split microcycle that fits it. And then also in their case, like let's try to keep you as healthy as possible. And then also for them, even those folks, like most people can benefit from a mental break way more than they think they can. And this is something that sometimes we see with very elite athletes, that the first accusation they get is like, oh, you're so relaxed, and you sandbag certain segments because you're gifted and you're lazy. And quite often it's just that they're so connected to their physiology. I think a big part of it's because it speaks so loud to them. It just reminds me. You remember Brian, like Ray Williams before USAPL Nationals in 2015. He's just like, I'm just gonna do some leg extensions because he was that beat up, and I'm gonna leave it up. I'm gonna leave it up to the big man. Let's go. and to like a novice guy who looks up to Ray, they'd be like, no, I'd get stapled by my squat before I do that, right? And Ray was so in tune. He's like, no, this is what's gonna give me the best day when it matters the most. So yeah, many different reasons to refeed, but I do think it's something that people have to be a little bit more just tactful with it and give it a chance, because it's completely changed the way I've dieted. It completely changed the way my athletes have dieted.
Yeah, for sure. Well said. All right, keeping with our diet training kind of alternating questions here. Question number 6. How many warm-up sets should I be doing with my heavier compound movements? I swear it takes me forever to get to my working weight with bench press, and especially leg press. Sometimes up to 20 minutes on leg press. But I'm in my 30s and I'm not trying to get hurt. Maybe I'm overdoing it though. Do you all have a general prescription on time or number of sets before the working sets? And one thing I'm going to point a lot of our listeners to is all of the very good vlogs that we've been putting out here at 3D Muscle Journey. Go see Alberto's contest prep vlog. See Brian's vlogs on different aspects of applying training. And with that being said, I have got a vlog that you can go to that maybe we can link in the show notes here on working up to a top single. And I basically go through in a very short 5-6 minute video. I work up to a top single on squats, not a 1 rep max, but it's a top single that's my heaviest of the day. But it's still a great question, because Brian, I know that you are much stronger than I, and it probably takes you a while to work up to like a top single that is, say, an RPE 8. For your squat, for example, because you do have a very heavy squat. So, I think I'll probably kind of toss this your way. When you do end up having to do, say, 6-7 sets, slowly working up to, whatever it is that you're going to do, what's your prescription, both, kind of sets, reps, and time?
Yeah. I don't know for sure if I'm having more warm-up sets, if with higher weight, because I think a lot of it's relative. And I think there's a lot of people that probably do overdo it a little bit. Or, maybe he's spending 20 minutes on the leg press just to get some blood flowing. It's like, okay, well, maybe do a stationary bike for 5 minutes and 3 warm-up sets, and you can be much more time efficient. So training the actual movement isn't like that. That's kind of a prerequisite to warming up, but that doesn't have to be your only means of warming up. Like, there's a lot of other things you can do, dynamic work, just getting joints working through their active range, and then kind of usually I'm doing 3 to 4 sets probably is a warm up, even in a situation like that. I think, Eric this is an older video on our channel. It's a couple years old, but it's another how to warm up for lifting weights. And he walks through like a good full body warm up, but he has this chart, and I think it's I pulled it up when I saw this question, because I think it's from the training pyramid book. But typically, like, the overall theme here is, the higher rep the set, you're probably going to need a little bit less warm-up weight, because the load is going to be lighter as a byproduct. So the other kind of theme is reps typically come down. I think a lot of people, when they warm up, they're doing, let's say they're warming up for a set of 8 on dumbbell bench. They feel like all their warm-up sets need to be sets of 8, and that can really tax them. So, I might do 1 set, of 10. If I'm doing like barbell bench, for example, like 1 set of 10 with the bar, and then put on 135, maybe a set of 8, and then 225, a set of 5 maybe. And then I just taper the reps down, and none of those warm-up sets should be above, like, they should all really be below like a 5 RPE. But that way you're progressing the load. You're getting your nervous system woken up a bit. And you're also acclimating, just, in kind of maintaining that increase in core temp, and familiarizing your, like, just the movement, getting comfortable with the groove of a squat. But I think on average, I would say, yeah, there's probably like 4 workup sets if I'm working up to a max on a squat. And I think that's probably been the case the whole time, or close to it. There's going to be days where I might skip a set, and there might be days where I need an additional one. And so there's not like, don't feel like you have to, calculate percentages of your max and hit those exact things. Like, a lot of this is going to be off feel and just when you physically feel ready. Now, I would say if you're spending 20 minutes warming up and you feel like your performance is suffering, you feel fatigue going into your working sets, that's probably an indication you're doing too much. And I think on the flip side, sometimes you'll see people, an athlete will check in and say, like, it's normally my second or third set feels my best. And in those situations, it's like, okay, maybe you need an additional 1 or 2 warm-up sets so we can hit the ground running from the first working set on. So just looking at the bottom line of how you actually feel when you're performing, when you do your working sets, I think will tell you most of what you need to know there.
I think big one you said is people underestimate the power of a little 5-10 minute warm up, especially if you're one of those folks that just tends to run a little bit colder. Might make sense. Yeah, a lot of what you said, Brian, well, actually, this is how it goes for me. If it's a free weight movement, it might take a little bit more because I have to groove that pattern. Whereas ISO and a lot of machine work, not so much, but that will vary, right? Depending on how I feel. There's certain days where you just feel like super twitchy and you're like, oh, I don't need a whole lot. Like, I feel good. And if anything, on those days, I have to watch out for not skipping on my warm-ups because I'm excited about where this is going to go. Also, vice versa to that, one thing I've been doing with a lot of athletes, especially ones with, he's in his 30s, he's probably, he's made some strength gains over the years, that is opening up with a lighter working weight, especially when the goal is like muscle growth, because it kind of does both things for you. It kind of warms you up and it's stimulus at the same time. So you save time. So that set that would have been just something I touch and then leave it there, it's like I can just turn that into a working set. I'm gonna end up somewhere in the 12 to 15 rep range. And especially as you start to age a little bit as a bodybuilder, like, sometimes you don't want to express your max strength. Like, all my epic RDLs that were near 500 or a little bit beyond 500 this off season, they had high rep sets before because I didn't want the smoke of whatever a fresh RDL set would have been. So that's something you can do, is just turn one of those warm-up weights into an actual working set. That's going to save you like one set, essentially, one warm-up set. But it will vary, man. It will vary on how you're feeling, like, from day to day. One thing is for sure, movements that fit me really well, I also tend to need less warm-up as opposed to movements that I'm trying to make fit for whatever reason. Or if I've been using a movement for way too long and I just want to keep milking it because it's been good to me, somewhere like deep in that rabbit hole, I'm like, man, it used to take me 3 sets to like get to my working weight, and most days I'm needing 4 or 5. That's usually a sign that I need to substitute it for something that I prefer less, which for me can be hard. But yeah, it's kind of an open-ended question. It kind of just depends on the person and lots of factors. But that pre-warm-up, that just getting on a bike, and one thing, like, if you are one of those folks that, like you said, Brian, that the second, third set seems to be better, I think a lot of those folks are a little bit too concerned with wasting energy. But it's so crazy. Like, whatever you ask your body to do, like it's going to get good at having that sort of endurance. Like there was that one show on Netflix about the sprinters. Like all those runs they do before they actually do the run that matters. Like I think to the person who's not in shape, they'd be like I'd be done, right? In sprinter shape. And there is such thing as bodybuilder shape. And it's something that you can work on and improve. Over the last few years, I've been kind of closing up my rest times in between sets. And it's so crazy, like how not much has changed. There's just a little bit of a glitch there between like when mentally I want to go back in there and when my body's like actually ready. So that's something to experiment with, just because if you figure some stuff out, much like I did, it might condense your training time a little bit.
All right. Yeah, good stuff. Okay, and we're moving on to a diet-related question, and not diet as in fat loss, but nutrition, I guess you might say. I want to follow the recommendations of having 1 or 2 servings of produce per meal, but it honestly makes me so bloated and gassy. Is it really that bad to have lower vegetable or lower fruit diet? Have you guys seen any negative side effects with your athletes who eat less produce? I want to be conscious of my health, but it honestly just bothers my gut.
I think it's if something's making you routinely bloated and gassy, it's probably not a good source of the fruits and veggies and what you're trying to get out of it. So if it seems like it's a universal thing, then it might be worth bringing it down a bit and looking to supplement fiber intake, through more whole grains. But I think it's also going to be very dependent on the individual. And, if somebody's deficient in a specific micronutrient routinely, then they either need to supplement with that or be getting it through their diet. And sometimes that may require fruits and vegetables. But, I've never, some personal anecdote, like I like fruits and vegetables a lot, but I probably don't eat as much as I intend to. It's like in reality, it always ends up falling a little bit short. From like a bodybuilding perspective, I don't think I'm any worse for wear because of it. If anything, maybe it impacts satiety a bit in a negative way if I'm getting less fiber on a given day, but I usually still do pretty good with overall fiber. So, yeah, I think if something's routinely making you feel bloated and gassy, it's at least worth exploring an alternative source for those fruits and veggies.
Berto, you got anything to add?
No, same thing. Just play around. Like broccoli, no way. Like even if I cook that thing all the way down, it's just not going to be a fun time, especially if I have it consecutive days. But green leafy vegetables like raw, no issue at all. So yeah, play around, try to figure it out, and maybe your ceiling over time can like go up. Maybe there is a threshold where it's not where you want to be, but you can slowly build that thing up, much like some people do. Like I'm kind of hybrid with like lactose. Like I have this clear threshold, don't cross that line, but I can work on it and slowly build it up if need be. But I could also lose it, and you're right. And if I cross that line, actually, I'll make it worse. So if anything, yeah, play with amounts, play with sources. There's almost something for everyone out there when it comes to the wide array of fruits and vegetables.
And Berto, the only thing I have to add is just expanding on what I feel is overlooked. And you mentioned raw lettuce, you said, right? I find myself, I have a much better time digesting raw fruits and vegetables as opposed to cook. Now, we're not really going to cook our fruits, but I mean, it does happen. Apple pie has got apples in it that are cooked, right?
Yay.
But, but I almost prefer to eat my vegetables and my fruits raw than I do cooked. Not that I don't eat them cooked, but I don't know. There's just, if I eat an entire plate of cooked cabbage, I have no idea what the fermentation value is of cooked cabbage and all these kind of things. But I do know that if I eat raw cabbage in a salad or put a big slice of it on my sandwich, I seem to do better with it than if I eat a small serving of cooked cabbage. You know what I mean? For whatever reason. And maybe that's just something personal to my particular digestive system. I don't really know. But yeah, I've been focusing a lot more on consuming those phytochemicals and those nature's vitamins from raw sources, as opposed to cook. So, all right, guys. Well, we got time for one more question. I just moved into a new home, and the extra drive to the gym just isn't worth it anymore with 2 young kids. I don't have much space, but I'm thinking of doing a home gym situation using only dumbbells. I'll probably still drive to the gym on the weekends. But do you think it'll be easy to keep progressing using only dumbbells 80% of the time? And if you only had dumbbells, what primary exercises would you recommend for the lower body? Boy, this takes us back to the shutdown of the COVID year of 2020 and 2021, right?
This takes me back to when Berto asked to borrow like my 70 through 80 pound dumbbells for a couple weeks, and I lugged them up the stairs and into my truck, and they sat in his driveway for 3 weeks. He never used them.
It was Gen 1 COVID, so he had to do. No one knew what was going to happen, so he had to do a nice thing. Because imagine if that would have been a goner.
If you got yeah.
No, and that was hard. It brought me back to COVID when I look at the dumbbells. I'm like, wasn't I just doing this? Because the gyms had just opened up again. So I like this question because it's always fun to get crafty with things, right? Where like I think in the past, like we would have sweated things a little bit differently. Like, the only gym that's reasonably close kind of sucks. On vacation or traveling for work, whatever, and this is all I have access to. Whereas like now it's kind of a fun time to put, your skills into play. And aging myself, but like, you get to like MacGyver the situation. So this will be fun. Who wants to be MacGyver first?
Oh man, I look at this question and I just like I love doing things like this on calls one-on-one with people. Yeah, I literally love it. So should I kick it off?
Yeah, go ahead, Brad.
Let's go, Stockton.
So he specifically asks about lower body. And I think everybody had their fill of split squats during the COVID shutdown, right? In fact, Berto, didn't you say that you were a little bit traumatized from doing split squats with your kettlebell or something like that?
Yeah, no, I'm good. I've done like once or twice before. After that, and I'm good.
Really though, to be honest with you, I have a certain, I don't know, just I guess a sick love for split squats here as of late. I check my ego at the door. If I'm going to do a good split squat or I'm going to hammer my quads, I'm just going to hold on to something. Yeah, maybe the Brad of 10 years ago was like, nah, don't hold on to anything. You're activating all those deep gluteal muscles and the hip flexors, trying to balance. But anymore, I just love just hammering the hell out of my quads doing kind of a quad dominant split squat. In fact, I was kind of heartbroken, as I mentioned earlier, this little kind of a little ache that I've got in the middle of my quad. That was kind of the first thing I got rid of was my split squats, and I genuinely missed them, But yeah, I just here as of late, just hold on to something, put a dumbbell in the other hand. I like to start from the bottom up. So like if my rear leg is elevated, I start with that knee on the ground. I don't even go to full contraction, just that full, shortened portion with my knee locked out. I just kind of stay in the sweet spot. I just kind of get my back knee off of the floor, kind of feel what is just short of getting my knee fully extended, and then right back down again. Knee touches the floor, back up again. Yeah, I have a certain sick love for that, right now. I really do. And I like it better than walking lunges. Walking lunges to me it feels like it hits my groin and, kind of like my deep inner pelvis more than I would really like it to, I guess, I want to kind of feel it in my quads. I kind of want to feel it in my glutes. And so my preference has been kind of do the split squat over the walking lunges. But at the same time, I know a lot of people that love their walking lunges, and a couple of dumbbells in each hand, and go tripping up and down your hallway, or if you're lucky enough to have stairs in your house, get a couple dumbbells in your hand and just kind of take a little trip up and down those stairs, but yeah, that to me, that sounds like fun. Let's build a day at home doing things like that. You're going to the gym on the weekends. Let's get some other stuff in there. Let's get some machine work in there. I feel like 4 days a week, you could build a very well-rounded program. 2 days at home with dumbbells, 2 days at the gym on the weekend. That to me sounds like oodles of fun.
Yeah. I think split squats are the first thing that came to mind. Kind of like you, Brad. I somehow am enjoying those at the moment. And I've been doing them on a Smith machine, which I think is nice from a stability perspective. It's, there's less of that, like just getting into place, the struggle and pain in the ass that can be. So, but with dumbbells, yeah, like you said, hold something, piece of PVC pipe, something for stability, in one of your hands. And, the nice thing about split squats is, even that back leg that's elevated, like you're getting a lot of stretch in that rec fem, which, normal bilateral patterns aren't going to really get at. So if you are emphasizing like driving through the front leg and kind of into that back pad, you are getting some rec fem stimulus from the split squat itself. So it's like a good all-in-one efficient way to do things. You can elevate the front heel, have it be very quad biased and upright. You can have more forward lean, a more vertical shin angle. It can be a great glute exercise. Right now I'm doing them on the Smith machine with like a plate under my foot just to get a little bit more hip flexion. And they beat you up pretty good. Usually it's only a couple sets, but I think between that, the bilateral option that you would have would be like goblet squats potentially. I think those can be good, especially if you were to try to maybe slow the tempo down, make them a little bit less taxing in terms of rep ranges. Adding pauses. I think depending on how heavy the dumbbells go, you might have to implement things like slower tempos just to keep things reasonable in terms of set duration. And still pushing to close enough proximity to failure. But I think split squats are great. Lunges, I think I've always looked at them as more of like a glute dominant movement because like usually you're propelling yourself forward more so than vertically. So it's a lot of like hip extension going on there, but they can be great for that. I'm not a huge fan of them just because one, you may not have the space to do them. I don't really have a good enough space to really do walking lunges. But then like dumbbell RDLs, for a hinge, if you want to do that. And, you could do single leg calf raises on stairs and, usually you don't need as much weight as you think on those. I think if you add like a true 2 to 3 second pause and you almost like the cue I like to use is like I'll lightly flex my quad on that leg and the stretch is noticeably better. I think sometimes I'll like if I'm doing them on a leg press, I get that like nerve tension behind the knee. But if I'm standing up with my legs extended, I can really kind of tense that quad and get a really deep calf stretch and let some of that passive force dissipate, and it makes the set a lot harder. So, so I think your bases are covered. I think with lower body and upper body, even more so.
Man, not much to add. A lot of people who end up doing this end up liking it, and they just end up adding little things to their setup. And it's always great because they make the most out of it. Whereas people in commercial gyms with all these options, like they don't milk things for what they could be as much. So I'd say I'm just gonna go with like next things I would like purchase probably. Like a little cable stack like would go a long way. Probably some wedges. You could probably just make those out of, and this would help with the lower body. Just some wood. There's some cheap ones on Amazon as well. Because it's crazy. A Bulgarian split squat that's very quad dominant with an elevated heel. Like you don't need a whole lot of weight, and failure just kind of comes out of nowhere. It's quite pleasant to actually get to failure there when it's really just the quad screaming and not as much the adductor and the glutes, because when you have all those muscles screaming at you, it's quite the experience. So, outside of that, maybe hinging, like could be an issue eventually, but you could probably kind of pre-exhaust the area a little bit with some single leg glute bridges or hip thrust. You don't need a whole lot of weight because the dumbbells for most people eventually those would kind of run dry. But you could just play with tempo. That's the one thing. Like hypertrophy just seems to be more and more forgiving every year. So if you have to control like not just the tempo on the eccentric, but also a bit on the way up and do some pause work, it's still going to work just as fine. It's just not as straightforward, and you have to think a little bit more. You're doing your thing as opposed to a more traditional hinge where for the most part you're just trying to get it up as efficiently as possible, and the slowdown kind of comes to you out of nowhere. So these situations are fun because eventually when you do have access to more, you're just going to be a way better lifter in my experience. So
yeah, pre-exhaustion, Berto, that's a good one because word of experience, I pre-exhausted late last year after contest prep was over. I pre-exhausted my hamstrings doing kind of like medicine ball hip thrusts. Can you imagine? You can kind of picture it. You put your feet up on a medicine ball and you kind of curl your legs towards your butt, so it's kind of a hip thrust and a leg curl all at the same time. And I did like just a couple of sets of those, no weight added at all, because you just go real slow on the eccentric. And then I just grabbed the heaviest dumbbells that I had, which I think were like 65 pounds. And I just did some RDLs with that. Tell me about how you feel the next day, and I will be able to sympathize with you. So those Charlie horses were really bad the next day. So, Berto, probably similar to the way you were feeling when you were doing the RDL with the cambered bar.
Oh, yeah.
So enjoy the pain there. So, all right, gents, thank you very much for chatting it up with me today. Till next time, gang. Enjoy your 3D Muscle Journey podcast.
What's going on, everybody? Eric Helms here, Chief Science Officer of 3DMJ. Thank you for listening to the podcast. And let me just take 1 second to tell you about MASS, Monthly Applications in Strength Sport. This is a monthly research review that I do with Lauren Colenso-Semple, Eric Trexler, as well as Mike Zerdos. These are experts in their field, and we cover all the information relevant to you as an athlete or coach if you're working with strength or physique athletes, or if you're a recreational or competitive athlete yourself. We cover nutrition, training, sports psychology, and health. And we do this in written format, as well as, since you like the podcast, audio summaries, as well as video concept reviews. If you're a trainer, we also have continuing education credits for ACSM, NSCA, NASM, and ACE. So head over to 3dmusclejourney.com, click on the products tab, and you can find us there. I look forward to seeing you, and enjoy the podcast.